Good morning, everyone. My name is Patricia Blunden from the HSC. I'm here to speak to you this morning around change management, introducing you to our new change framework, People's Needs Defining Change, but also looking at a large component of that framework, which is the people and cultural platform, and really seeking to create understanding with you around the different factors in our environment that make or break change efforts. Because there are a range of tools and templates available through the Change Hub and also on hse.ie/change guide to guide you through the template. But what is it, to guide you through the framework, but what is it about our environment? What are the key things we need to understand about ourselves, about our service users, about our colleagues, about our external environment before we embark on the change journey? So that's the purpose of today's session with you all. Thanks. Okay, so this morning we're going to talk about understanding change management. Okay, so we're going to have a conversation for today. So what are we going to talk about? Well, why does change matter? Why do we embark on change in the first instance? Anybody have any thoughts about why change matters in health and social care? To make improvements for the benefit of our patients and service users. Okay, so it does matter. Are we all agreed on that? So if it matters, then what has to change? You know, if we're all striving for safer, better healthcare, how are we set up to achieve that? And if we break that down a little bit, you know, what has to change maybe at the level of institution? Is our institution, is where we work, whether you're in the HSC, a voluntary provider, whether you work in Ireland or overseas, is that geared up towards achieving safer, better healthcare in terms of its structure? In terms of what we do. So not just in terms of structure, but what we do. The processes that we have every day, the services we deliver. Is that achieving safe and better healthcare? And then lastly, at the level of the individual, at our own personal level. Okay? So what insights do I need then to give change its best chance of success? Okay, so it's not just about taking the tools that are available and applying them mindlessly. We need, as leaders of change, as drivers of change, as sponsors of change, as champions of change, we need to understand our environment so that in an intelligent, informed way, using the evidence and having an understanding of everything in environment, we can choose the right approach to get the best results. Okay, so before we talk about organisational change, all our organisations, no matter wherever we work, they're all made up of people. So the organisation doesn't in fact change, it's the people that change. So before we talk about organisational change, let's have a look at how do we change personally? What do we need to do to change personally? Okay, so here we go. This is the model of personal change. It's by Prochaska, Di Clemente and Norcross. Anybody here work in the area of health promotion? Okay. Well, if you did work in the area of health promotion, you might be familiar with this model. It's been around quite a while. But what it does is it documents the different stages of change for us personally. So it starts up there at number 1, pre-contemplation. We're not actually thinking about the change. And then we move into contemplation. We start thinking, oh God, maybe I need to make some changes in my life. Then you're going to prepare, take some action, and then maintain it. So if everybody thinks about a time in their life when they've had to change something in their personal life, now that might be going on a diet, it might be taking up exercise, it might be giving up cigarettes, it might be cutting down on alcohol. But can you identify with those stages? So you might think, well, I'm doing fine, but then one day you're walking up the stairs and you find yourself out of breath and you think, oh gosh, I really need to give up the cigarettes. And then you might think, might set a date for that. you might get your nicotine patches, you might stop buying cigarettes, and then you put so that's your preparation. Then you put your plan into action. But then, you might start on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, the 1st of January. What happens on the 21st of January, say, when you're out with friends in a social setting and everybody's going outside to the smoking hut to have a cigarette? How do you maintain that? How do you build your own resilience to help you maintain the change leading to a better lifestyle? So it's tough, isn't it? Has anybody ever been on that journey? So if you were to look at that model of personal change and kind of superimpose it on organisational change, at what stage in organisations, in your experience, would you say that change is usually initiated at? So just you can call out 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. 4, did I say 4? 4. So you think change is usually initiated at 4, yeah. Yes, no, we're talking at organisational level. And I think, I don't know what the remainder of the class think, but usually it can be more around the stage 4 where people are actually taking action, or sometimes at planning. And where would you say change or support is most often removed then during that cycle in an organisational sense? So if you've been through organisational improvement, where has the support for maintenance been removed? 5. At 5. So you see how I just wanted to draw your attention to that, to understand how we experience change personally, and yet sometimes there's a disconnect between what we know about how we experience change personally and how we manage change in an organisational setting. So those 2 steps of understanding that when you come with a change story to people, your stakeholders or whoever you need to get on board, sometimes they can be at the pre-contemplation stage. They might think we're doing fine. We're reaching our KPIs, our customers are happy with the service we're providing, and that you're going to them with an action plan without going through those stages of, have you considered this, or we've looked at a new piece of evidence, or this is what's going on in another jurisdiction, or research has told us that, So it's important to have those conversations and follow all the steps on the journey, because sometimes the people that you're trying to persuade to come on that journey with you are actually at that pre-contemplation stage. Now, we're going to have a little interactive quiz to get us started and get us into the thinking mode. So if you have a pen and paper in front of you, just want to jot down the answers to these. The first question is, what percentage of people reach their target weight in Weight Watchers? Okay, have you got the answer to that one? The next question is, what percentage of people maintain that target weight forever? The next question is, what percentage of people stop smoking and never start again? And the last question is, what percentage of people stop smoking after a major physical crisis, such as a heart attack, and never start again? And I'm grateful to Professor David Ulrich, who shared these quiz questions with us at a session that he did with us in the HR division earlier this year. So, does anybody want to shout out the answer that they got for question 1? What percentage of people reach their target weight in Weight Watchers? I'm hearing 5. I'm hearing 30. 50. 75%. Okay, so we have everything from 5, the cynics over here, to 75. Okay. The right answer to that question is 5%. Correct answer. Now, you're not allowed to alter your other answers, okay? Because the answer to the next question, what percentage of people maintain that target weight forever? 20. The right answer is 1 to 2%. Okay? What percentage of people stop smoking and never start again? Anybody had any answers around that? 20%? 50? The right answer is 15 to 20%. And then, what percentage of people stop smoking after a major physical crisis, such as a heart attack or a stroke, and never start again? 30 to 80. The right answer is 45 to 50. Okay, so I'm just sharing that with you to kind of turn your thinking on that, you know, personal change is difficult, and the numbers bear that out. And then maintaining personal change is also difficult. So, you know, I'm addressing you today as leaders of change. So bear in mind that when, again, you're persuading people to come on a change journey with you, that can be a difficult journey for them to embark on, and then it can be a difficult journey for them to stay on till completion. Okay, so where do you start then? We talked about the journey of change. Where would you start? Anybody have any ideas? Anybody been part of an improvement initiative in the last couple of months or the last couple of years and want to share their experience with us? Identify the need. That's a good place to start.
What's your aim?
Identifying what your aim is. That's another good place.
Know what you're doing right now.
Get a baseline of what the current situation is. That's also true. And what is the evidence telling us? And all of that is true. But all those answers have one thing in common, in that you're all starting with the other, in terms of what the outcome, what the evidence is. And what I'm going to recommend for you today is to start in the mirror. Start with yourself. Okay, so understand yourself, because if you're the leader of the change, your mindset and the assumption that you make around that change has a major influence on the outcome. It has major influence on your own belief in your ability to execute the change, you know, the people that you draw around you to be part of the project team, you know, the outcome you achieve. So it's important. You don't have to share that information with anybody, but have a look at yourself. So who do you see when you're looking in the mirror? Okay? So some of the things you might consider is just to be consciously aware of yourself. Anybody who works in health and social care, be it in Ireland or overseas, it can be a fast and frantic environment. People are very busy, under pressure. It's a scarce environment. Sometimes staff feel that not only are they doing their job, but they're, doing a job and a half. So it's fast. It's a fast environment. So you need to be consciously aware of what you're bringing to the table in that type of environment. Be aware of your own motivation. What's motivating you to bring this change about? What assumptions are you making? And assumptions are an important one, because we all have to frame the change. Sometimes change can be imposed on us, or it's mandatory. It comes down, it follows on a piece of legislation or government policy. Or other times, maybe we get a good idea and you're looking at the environment and you think, yes, we could do this better, or somebody makes an assumption, or somebody makes a suggestion to you. Now, the thing is, before you embark on the journey to come up with a solution to improve your service, it's important that you test the assumption that you're making that improvement journey on. Okay? Avoid being on autopilot, especially if you're. I'm not going to be especially, but if your job isn't managing change all the time, and maybe you have a clinical role, maybe you have a support role, maybe you have a management role, and you become very efficient and in that role because of your training and your years of expertise, and sometimes you can become so efficient that some of the steps that you take in your day are quite automatic. You don't have to actually put too much thought in them, because you've become so efficient and you've seen maybe operated on the same type of patient or done the same type of test, so you know the process, you know it intimately. And that brings me to Daniel Kahneman and the distinction between thinking fast and thinking slow. So can you just finish this sentence for me? Bread and butter. How much time did you spend thinking about that? None, because it's automatic. It's hardwired in your brain. It's a shortcut. And shortcuts are good because they make us, it makes us the difference between the first day you walked on the job and back when you qualified first, and you remember everything about that day, going in the front door, making your way to your destination, whatever ward or care setting you were working on. But nowadays, you just go to your workplace, you're at your desk before, you don't even think about pushing open that door or what stairs or what lift you have to take, because it's all become automatic. Now, the problem with thinking automatically is sometimes it can blindside us because we're being so efficient and thinking fast and getting the job done, but it can blindside us to, opportunities are out there, or it can blindside us to something that's not really working well. So Daniel Kahneman would say that instead of thinking fast, we need to think slow. And when he says think slow, he means being more outcome focused. So not thinking so much about what we do, but thinking about what outcome we are seeking, what we want to achieve, and how do we have to behave, what do we have to do to achieve that outcome. So pause and choose your response objectively. Okay, there's a lot of pressures on us in health, and there's a lot of demands, but if you're leading out on service improvement, really think about your outcome and take time at the beginning especially to test your assumptions and to make sure that the change you're about to embark on is actually an improvement and that it will generate benefits for our patients and service users and for their families and for the communities that we all operate in. Okay, so there's some thoughts about yourself. Then what about understanding the people that you're improving the service for? So when I start at the beginning, why is change important? Well, change is important because we want to deliver safer, better healthcare to the people who use our services. So then the next question is, who are your people? Okay, so for everybody sitting in this room, you're starting out on your year 2 now as part of your MSc. You're advanced, I would suggest, in terms of your service improvement initiative. You've given some thought to who your stakeholders are. But in thinking of the term stakeholders, you can use stakeholders. My own preference is to think of them as people, because we all are people, we're all human beings, and we're designing our services for other human beings. So who are your people? So I'm going to ask you to just spend 1 second thinking, for your service and improvement initiative that you've identified as part of your masters, who are your people? Okay, so can you pull them into your mind? All of the people. So they might be the people who use your service, they might be your colleagues, might be your boss, might be the community, might be the people who refer service users into the service that you provided. So think about those. Do you know them? Can you bring them into your head? Okay, so you know your people. You've identified them. Now the next question is, what's important to them? Okay, so do you know the answer to that question? You know the answer to that question. This man is nodding away. What's important to your people?
First, that you bring quality of care to them.
Okay, so quality is important.
Access of care.
Access.
You have to also think about their understanding of your change. That do they understand the change you are trying to implement?
Okay.
Get them on board of the change that you are trying.
Okay, but I'm asking, the question is, have you ascertained what's important to them? So not what should be important to them, what is actually important to them.
And that's why you said bring them on board.
And ask them that question. Very good. Okay. So know your people, know what matters to them, understand their mindset and attitude. Okay? Understand the constraints and their preferences and their skill sets. Now, those 3, constraints, preferences and skill sets, they would relate, those characteristics relate more so to your colleagues. But it's very important to understand what people's preferences are. Because if you understand their preferred way of doing things, especially, dare I say, clinicians who have invested a lot of themselves in terms of time, energy and resources in getting their professional qualifications, sometimes for years, they have a preferred way of doing things. So if you're going to ask them to change that habit, change that preferred way of doing things, things, doesn't it make sense that you would understand what their preference is? Because then when you're telling the story, when you're persuading, when you're trying to get them on board, you can present that story bearing their preference in mind so that you can demonstrate the benefits to them and hopefully nudge them in the direction that you'd like them to move into. Okay, so somebody said when we started off, where would you start? Understanding what your baseline is. So part of understanding what that baseline is, or what is the current situation, is understanding what the current habits and routines are. Because remember, if we're going to introduce a new way of doing things, basically what we're asking people is to break their established habit, break their established routine, and to take on a new habit or a new routine. So it is important to have a full understanding of why people are doing things the way they're doing things now, why they are behaving the way they are now, because you're going to go and ask them to change that habit, change that routine. Have a good understanding of the level of belief that your many stakeholders in. So if you go and you have a workshop, or you go and speak to your service users and you say, you know, we're going to improve our services. The reason we're doing that is because the evidence tells us there's a better way of doing things which will result in a better outcome for you. It's important that you get your head around the level of beliefs that they have and the story that you're telling, the level of trust. For colleagues, it's important that if you're introducing a change or create a new habit or a new process, a new way of doing things, that they see that as fair. Now, it may mean that they are discommoded. It may mean that maybe they're losing some power, some status. It may mean a change to their terms and conditions. But their sense of fairness is something that needs to be considered in this, because if they perceive that the change is unfair to either them or their colleagues, then you can be generating resistance to change. So it's presenting your story in a way that's seen to be fair, and seeing that you see them, you recognise where they are, that you recognise that maybe they're going to be discommoded, but it's in doing that, you're telling the story of safer, better healthcare and why we all have to get on board and make that contribution. So the levels of belief, trust, opportunities for involvement. Consider intrinsic motivation. So not just you'll be rewarded sometime in the future because we're delivering safer, better healthcare to you, but for colleagues, what opportunity can you give them as part of that process in terms of an opportunity for them to grow, an opportunity for them to make maybe autonomous decisions, an opportunity for them to experiment. So to be involved, to have an opportunity to contribute to the service improvement, to be an investor in that improvement, so that you're not going asking for buy-in when you've made the decision and you've designed up a new service, and then you're going to your colleagues and say, please implement this now. This is the new blueprint for how we're going to deliver the service. You want to have them in at the beginning. You want them as co-investors. You want them to co-design with you. Okay. So we've had a look at ourselves. We've had a look at our people. We've had to think about them. What about what's going on in our environment? So are you familiar with this acronym PESL? Political, economical, social, technological, legal, and environmental. So let's just go through, pick one or two of those. So think about the environment where you work. What's going on politically in Ireland at the moment that's going to impact the service that you deliver? Brexit. And how is Brexit going to impact on your service?
So it may, we're not too sure.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I suppose you have to consider it in any of the external things that we're doing from our organisation.
Okay, I'm sure if people who are working in any sort of environment where they're using, where they have a pharmacy, where they have medical supplies, where they have to buy in equipment from abroad or medicine from abroad, pharmaceuticals from abroad, that does need to be considered. What about recent pieces of legislation that have been passed in Ireland in the very recent past? Open disclosure is a big one. And the 8th Amendment, and that legislation for that was going through the Dáil last week. So how is that going to impact on, our environment? So part of the reason that you're participating in your Masters, but part of the journey where we move from being I suppose, having a purely clinical or a business role into having a leadership role, whether that's a leadership kind of hierarchical role or a leadership in the network role, is that we increase our awareness of what's going on in our environment. And the reason we need to do that is we need to be informed, but we need to be able to react. So we need to see what's coming down the line so that we're in a position to steer our services so that it's ready. We're not caught by surprise. I'll pick one more, technology. Okay, so what's going on with technology in your life? GDPR. How has... I heard a figure last week, something like 20 billion mobile phones now in the world. 20 billion mobile phones. How are we leveraging that in healthcare? How are we leveraging technology? When you think of, if you're of my generation, we've seen huge technological changes. From the time when I was a very little girl, if you wanted to make a phone call, I had to leave the house and go down the town and queue outside the phone box and go in and press button A, to where we are today, where technology is all pervasive. It's in our lives. There's so much data out there that's gathered around our own behaviour, our own habits, our own routines. But how are we harvesting that? How are we leveraging what technology has to offer us to improve our services and deliver safer, better healthcare? And maybe are we a little bit behind the curve vis-a-vis how we've adopted to technology in our personal lives, where you can be driving home and on your smartphone without even touching it, you can ask it to put on the heat or turn on the oven or open the secure gate if you have one. But we've in our personal lives, we seem to have embraced technology and leveraged it a lot more, or adopted to it quicker, maybe than at an organisational level. Will people agree with that? Okay. So some of the things to consider with your environment: what's happening out there? Okay, and that what's happening out there, but what's happening out there that's having an impact in here. So again, for people who are moving into a leadership role, for people who are leading change, you need to have an awareness of that, because that's part of your responsibility. That's part of the contribution that you're making. Do we recognise the impact? Are we ready for the impact? As this lady said, are we ready for the impact of what Brexit may bring? What's happened in the past that may affect how we respond to change now, and how we proceed and what we achieve? So being aware that we work in a complex adaptive system, and with our new change framework, people's needs, defining change, that's up front and central as part of the framework, because the framework is based on what the literature is telling us, and it's telling us that for health and social care, it's a complex adaptive system. It's ever changing. And what does that mean? That means that the health service that I work in today is not the health service that I worked in 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 15 years ago. So it's not changing. It's always moving. It's always adapting. It adapts to the moratorium on recruitment. It adapts to changes in the environment, where during the financial crisis, where a lot of people unfortunately lost their jobs, and then they had entitlements for medical cards and free GP cards. So we, as a provider of services, have to be able to adapt to what's going on in our environment, externally and internally. But for people who are bringing about change, just bear in mind, the system doesn't stand still for you while you bring about the change. So I think, in my years of working with teams and people coming to me for advice, maybe when their change efforts have failed, or when they're on the rocks or they get stuck, when we peel the onion and go back to where maybe they went wrong, was they had misdiagnosed the complexity of the system. They thought they were going to work in a simple system where they just had to diagnose the problem and there would be cause and effect, and the system would stand still for it while they fixed it. But that's not the system that we operate in. Our system is complex, it's adaptive, it's ever-changing. So even while we're improving it, we have to have a flexible approach to operate in that system, operate in a VUCA world where we can deal with volatility, we can deal with uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity. So moving away from this notion where, we know what we know and we can command and we can control. That's not how the health system is now, and it's not how our world is now. So as leaders of change, as leaders in our health system, we have to be able to flex and adapt our approach to this type of environment, okay? And then lastly, so you've had a look at yourself, you know who your people are, you understand what their needs are, what their skill sets are, what their constraints and preferences are. And these are all important. You need to know this at the beginning, because you will be making a plan to sustain your change and sustain the people elements of the change. So how can you make that plan if you don't understand the profile of the people and what their needs are? So then what about your process? So this is a little bit, in the change guide, it's a little bit like the defined stage. So as the lady rightly pointed out, decide on what your outcome is. But not only must you decide on it, you must agree on it. Because there's very few people who bring about change on their own. And in health, it's nearly impossible, because we are a network. This is how we deliver. We work in teams. So agree on the outcome you want to achieve. And I would say, even if that takes time and energy at the start, it's worthwhile. Because if you don't have that agreement, and if you're working with even one person who doesn't agree, over time, over the 6 or 8 or 12 months it might take you to implement that change, that one person who's not on board can sap a lot of energy from the initiative. But maybe not an open conflict, but sometimes through tokenism. They can attend meetings, they can nod and smile, they can agree to take work on. It doesn't get done. But they can sap a lot of energy away from a process, and you need that energy to make the change happen. So the agreement is key. So do spend time and energy getting that agreement at the start. Commit to working together then to achieve your agreed goal. Okay, so you can look at options, and I would say it's a little bit different when you're in college, when you're doing an MSc, because you pick your initiative that you want to include as part of your qualification for your MSc. But in real life, I would say generate the options, look at the options. You might need to use an objective weighting score to decide which option you're going to go with. But generate the options, agree on an option, and then what you're looking for is seeking commitment from everybody around that table to bring everything they have to the table to make that option happen. Okay? Because we work in a complex adaptive system, you have to be ready in terms of the readiness, deciding on the scope of your initiative, how you're going to stage it, the pacing of it, if you're going to spread it from something that's local out through the system, how you're going to support it and how you're going to sustain it. And again, that goes back to the very early stages of knowing your people and knowing what their requirements are. Build trust and create understanding before you try to influence. So again, if you go back to our friends Prochaska, De Clemente and Norcross and their model of personal change, make sure that you spend the time having the conversations, creating that understanding before coming to people with either a plan or with action. Because we as human beings, it's a journey that we have to go through. We need to go through those steps. And then how will you know how well you're doing? And that brings us into the whole area of measurement. Okay, so you need to have an outcome measure, and you need to have some process measures that will tell you that the actions that you're taking to achieve your outcome are actually effective. Okay. So, as well as looking at the environment, ourselves, and our people, one of the ladies over here said using evidence. So, for the People's Needs Defining Change for the Health Services Change Framework 2018, we commissioned the Health Policy and Management Unit in Trinity to have a look for us at the literature from 2007 up to 2017. And the reason we thought of 2007 is because we had a previous literature review to support our previous change model, which was called Improving Our Services. So we looked at the literature from 2007 and 2017, and here are some of the key messages that the literature is telling us. Understanding the local context is critical. And this is very relevant for us in Ireland, because quite often change initiatives can be, they're stipulated from a national level. So say a new piece of legislation comes in, for instance, the open disclosure, for the legislation around to support the 8th Amendment, any piece of legislation that comes in, how do you translate that then? How do you take something that's mandated nationally and bring it down into your service, into your locality, into your region? So you, as change leaders, have a critical role to play in translating, in explaining that change, and making it meaningful for people on the ground. So the local context is critical, and it needs to be considered, so that one size does not fit all. So a solution that fits in, an urban, busy teaching hospital may not fit in a rural, community-based, not elective-only hospital. So flex, adapt, make it meaningful for people on the ground. The literature is telling us that the people and cultural elements are key. So some of the elements that we touched on and will continue to touch on in the rest of the presentation, they're key to making change effective. So it's not just about taking the tools and the templates and mindlessly applying them to every single change. It's about having that understanding the importance of the people and cultural elements. The literature is saying to work with changing power structures, be implementation focused. Harness the energy and work with it, being mindful that your environment is ever changing. So you might not actually ever get to the end of one change initiative before you have to start another. But in the complex adaptive system in which we work, change is not episodic in any event. It should be continuous. Philip Crowley, our National Director for Quality, would say everybody has 2 jobs. Their first job is to do their job, and their second job is to improve their job. So we need to get away from this, and sometimes when I talk with other groups and they say, people are so fatigued, they're fatigued from change. And that's because they're thinking of change as something that's, a project. We did one project and then we did the other project. We need to move away from that mindset and start thinking about improvement and continuous improvement. So it becomes something that we do every day. Technology, as we talked about, it's a significant driver of change. And, maybe give some thought to how you're leveraging that driver in your own workplace. As I said, find workable solutions that focus on implementation and create positive impact for services. And then, we touched on this earlier, the critical role of middle managers and clinicians, the critical role of middle managers and clinicians as catalysts for change, as bringing change about. So it's important that we enable people to take up their leadership role. Leadership has nothing got to do with your position in the hierarchy. It's about shared capability. It's about giving people the opportunity to step up and be leaders. Okay, just a little bit about systems. And I'm sharing that quote there from the Canadian Healthcare Organisation. The health sector is often called a system, but is more accurately described as a melange of systems, not necessarily working in concert. So it's not just like one system. It's not like a train that leaves the station and stays on the one track from beginning to the end of its journey. It's a network of cross systems. So that's the environment that we're operating in. Now, within complex systems, you can have simple systems, and when I say simple, I mean it as the opposite of complex. David Snowden has done some excellent work on this, and I'll just share briefly. When we talk about a complex system, Snowden would recommend that in complex systems, the proper the approach, the decision-making style or the leadership style he would recommend is actually to probe the system, understand it, make sense of it, and then respond. Okay? Because, as we said, a complex system is ever-changing. Now, remember I mentioned earlier that the system doesn't stand still for you while you fix it. That's what distinguishes a complex system from a complicated system. And a complicated system is the domain of experts. So if I have a problem with my car, I can't fix that car, so I can't fix the engine of the car. But if I bring the car to a mechanic, he can disassemble that engine, he can take every single component of the engine apart, and then he can put it together in the same order, having fixed it, and it will work. But that doesn't work in health because it's adaptive, it's always moving, it's always changing. An example of a simple system would be like a call centre, or sometimes an example of a simple system in health would be maybe the lab or X-ray, where a sample comes in or an X-ray comes in, you sense it, you categorise it, so what test does it have to be done, you respond, and then the sample goes, the report goes back out into the system. So there's an excellent couple of videos on the Change Hub that we've shared with the permission of David Snowden, and I'd advise you to have a look at that if you'd like to learn more about it. But for this morning, the key message is health is a complex adaptive system, therefore you cannot have cause and effect. You can't have that direct linear type relationship between cause and effect because it's changing. But the important thing is to recognise the complexity of the system that you're working in. One size does not fit all, and the other element is if you're changing one element of a system, the nature of systems, no more than the rainforest is, the nature of systems is that they will adapt back to put pressure on the change or the intervention so that it changes back to the way it was before there was any intervention. So if you're going to make a change as part of a system, you need to know what's happening upstream and downstream, and you need to involve those different players in your change, and then you have to make sure that it's resilient enough to withstand that pressure from the other elements of the system. Okay? So adapt your approach depending on the complexity of the context. Does that make sense? Okay. Few wee thoughts on leadership. And again, the literature is saying that a distributed leadership style is key to success, and we go into more detail in that in People's Needs Defining Change. But just some thoughts on leadership, I suppose, from my own perspective. But the first one is moving from this concept of the leader as one person to leadership, which is shared capability. So, there's 130,000 people working in health in Ireland. If we persist with developing only leaders, individuals, even if we do that, and I'm very conscious that I'm speaking to you today as leaders, but when you go back into a pool that's 130,000 and you've developed maybe in any 1 year maybe 300 leaders, so we have to have and it's not either or. It's like a jigsaw. So we do need to develop individual leaders, but we also need to pay attention to leadership and devolving leadership and supporting and building shared capability. Okay, so in terms of your own role as a leader of change, and remember I'm here speaking to you today around understanding change, I just want to share this model by Peter Fudo. He is an Australian change consultant. So he has this very simple model where, as you see, it's a pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid he talks about having the skills, being able to do change. So if you're going to lead change, well then you're going to bring other people with you on that journey, you have to have an understanding of what tools are out there, what skills you'll need, how to apply those tools, and that's a little bit about what we're at this morning. But you can see that that's the top element of the pyramid. The bigger middle element then is around seeing. So as a leader of change, it's important that you're able to see potential. You're able to see opportunity. You're able to see ways that possibly we could do this differently. And this comes back, remember we talked about the assumptions that we have, or our mindset and biases. That's why you need to have a little bit of self-examination at the start. Because what assumptions do and biases, they're like blind spots. They stop you seeing opportunities in our environment. Okay? So that's why it's important that you have an honest conversation with yourself to see, do you have any blind spots? Do you have any assumptions that are blocking you seeing opportunities in the environment? And that's one of the key roles of a leader. And then the base section of the pyramid, and the largest section is about being. So it's about modelling the behaviours, modelling the actions, modelling the approach you want to see from others. And he has a beautiful one-liner that's something we can all take away and share and use every day. And he talks about being a model before you can be a preacher. Because if we're preaching and we're expecting other people to do certain things, to behave in a certain way, to contribute in a certain way, and if we're not modelling those behaviours ourselves, well, then those words are empty. So, that's the challenge. That's the challenge in being a leader. And it can be a little bit scary, because sometimes what you have to model actually is courage. And model putting your hand up and saying, sorry, now this is not right, we need to do this again. So being a model before you can be a preacher. And that, if you take that through your day, you may not have to use it every day, but once a week or once a month, when you come under pressure, or you're sitting around a team and somebody maybe wants to take a shortcut, or, there's a deadline that has to be met. If you really adopt that principle for yourself of being a model before you can be a preacher, well then that's when you have to draw on your courage and put the hand up and say, sorry, I don't agree. Can we stop and look at this? Okay? I'm just sharing a quote from the Little Book of Large Scale Change, which is a fantastic resource that was produced by the Horizons team in the NHS, a lovely slim volume. It's on the Change Hub. But in relation to leadership in healthcare, it says the context of your leadership of transformational change will be shaped by dealing with emergence. So remember, goes back to our understanding that we're operating in a complex adaptive system. So in complex adaptive systems, stuff emerges all the time. So how do you flex? How do you respond? How do you step up to that? The need to influence rather than command and control. So even if we are currently in a role that's pretty hierarchical and we have direct reports, for simple type change that will suffice, because your direct reports will say, yes, boss, okay, we'll run with that. But once you're moving into large scale change that brings you beyond your own team, beyond your own ward, beyond your own hospital, beyond your own primary care area, once you begin to cross any sort of boundary at all, well then you're drawing on your influencing and your persuading and indeed your marketing skills. Okay? And then this concept of working through distributed leadership really comes to the fore. Because if the scale of your change is large, well then the more you distribute, the more champions you have, the more effective the story spreads, and the more people you touch through your network. Okay? So that's the Little Book of Large Scale Change. And then lastly, I want to just share a model of leadership that was shared a couple of years ago by Jean-Pierre Petriglieri at one of the HSC masterclasses. And again, I find it a very useful maxim that I use myself. So I suppose that's some of my own bias that I'm bringing this morning. But just to say this to yourself, whose leader can I be? So again, that has nothing got to do with your place in the hierarchy. Okay? Whose leader can I be? So, bearing in mind what I bring. So what am I bringing to the table? It may be that I'm a subject matter expert. It may be that, I'm honest and trustworthy. It may be that I have a particular focus on person-centered care. And sometimes you may not be the leader, but you may be the person that your colleagues are waiting on to follow. There are people out there who would like to follow somebody that they can trust, somebody that they have faith in, somebody that they know is an honest engine or an honest operator. Okay, so whose leader can I be? Why do people trust me? So if you expect people to follow you, even if it's not kind of that hierarchical followership, why are they following you? What is it that you've got that somebody else hasn't? Why are they following you? Why do they trust you? Okay, who benefits from my story, and then who pays the price? Now, just a moment on this one, because in healthcare in Ireland, we work in a constrained environment. We work in a scarce environment. Even in the good times, we have a budget, and decisions have to be made in a scarce environment, which means that in any year in a service plan, maybe one service benefits and another service loses out this year. So one year it might be mental health, another year it might be care of the elderly, another year it might be stroke rehabilitation, whatever it is. But always bear in mind, as leaders, always keep an eye out for the people who feel they have lost something, because it's upsetting for them, and you don't want to lose them, because next year it might be their year, or in 2 years' time an initiative might come out and you might really need their expertise. You might really need to bring them into the fold. So always bear in mind who's paying the price, as well as who's benefiting. And then, how can I create connection or encourage a common story? Because in health, for change, for improvement, that happens in the middle of a spectrum. So if you have parties who are polarized for any reason, through conflict or through the language that we're using or through our behaviours, people who are at the polls are not cooperating, they're not collaborating, they're not working together. So your role as the leader is to encourage that collaboration, to bring people into the middle ground where you can actually get energy and get work going and make progress. Does that make sense? Okay? So as I say, that's Jean-Pierre Petriglieri. Now, we talked about leadership. What about followership then? How can you be a leader without followers? And this lady, Amy Cuddy, and colleagues from Harvard did some really interesting work a couple of years ago on the importance of being able to connect with people and then lead. Okay? So this article talks about the importance that like comes before belief. So people, if you think about this in your own life, think about maybe a boss at work, or somebody in authority that you've went along to hear them speak, and if you like them, you're more inclined to believe what they have to say. Okay, so be likable is the lesson, is the message, is the takeout from that one. Be likable. So just a little bit of the science behind this then. So Amy Cuddy and her colleagues looked at the relationship between the warmth of the leader and the competence of the leader, and how that affected the relationship between the leaders and the followers. So for leaders who are low in competence and low in warmth, they're regarded with contempt by their followers. If they are highly competent but low in warmth, they're regarded with either fear or envy by their followers, and they have drag-along followers. If you have somebody who is low in warmth and if they're high in warmth but low in competence, then they have tag-along followers. So they're regarded as with pity by their followers. So I have a great boss, but she's very kind, but when it comes to making a decision or having the message or having the academic insight or the expertise, she falls down there, for instance. So, or then, really, this is nirvana over here, where you have a boss who's high in warmth and highly competent. And if you have a boss who's high on warmth and highly competent, then they have an ideal influence on their followers, and their followers admire them. So, again, this is just a little framework that maybe you'd like to plot your own leadership style on, but it's an evolutionary characteristic. The like comes before believe, because the like signals intent. So if you think of our forebears, Man the Hunter, who came across a rival tribe back in the day, by looking at the rival tribe's face, they could determine the intent, whether they were going to be joining in the hunt or become the hunt. So like signifies intent, but the competence signifies the capability of the person to act on the intent. on the intent. That's all right. The slow set starts. A coffee break. Okay? So, just some thoughts on followership, okay? And, you know, if you do have direct reports back in the office, how do you think they would view you? Just a little reflection on that one. So, some thoughts on communication. Communication, engagement. I prefer the word conversations. Okay? So, the first thing I need to share with you around communication or engagement is the housekeeping, the element that you should be all aware of, that either as an agent of your employer in Ireland or as an employee of the health services in Ireland, with the Employees Provision of Information and Consultation Act 2006, it provides a general right to information and consultation for employees from their employers on matters which directly affect them. So we are actually legally obliged to consult with our employees on matters that directly affect them. And for large-scale change, that usually would fall into that category. Okay? So that's one thing you should know and you should take away with you. Now, having said that, some thoughts from George Bernard Shaw on communication. The single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Okay? So, you know, again, I would have worked with teams over the years and yes, we have our communication plan and they've mapped all their stakeholders and they have the plan in front of them. But how much time have they actually gone out and taken the time to have conversations with the people who either need to be involved in the change or will be impacted by it? Okay? A piece of research by Nick Milton in 2014, social connection or discussion is 14 times more effective than written word best practice databases and toolkits. 14 times. Okay, so bear that in mind. So I suppose the takeaway on communication is, firstly, and that's why I use the word conversations, because the nature of a conversation is that it's two-way. So one person speaks, the other person listens, and then the person who is listening has an opportunity to speak, and the first person listens. So listening is a key element in communication and conversations. And again, if we go back to our model of personal change, to get an understanding of your people, if you go into an audience of your people and you're doing all the talking and you're telling them all about the development and you're sharing the evidence and you're sharing the rationale for doing the change, but you haven't actually listened to where they're coming from, you haven't actually asked them the question, what matters to you? What's important to you? What aspect of the service design do you think we should pay attention to? Would you like to be involved? So listening is key. So how can you, if you don't listen, you're not moderating your message. You're not operating as you should in a complex environment. Okay? So listen. Lesson number 2 is have conversations. Make time for conversations. They can be specific to the improvement that you're planning, but as you're moving up into leadership, as you're moving up into positions of influence, you should be having those conversations anyway. You should be building, you know, your own professional network and bridging networks. For small-scale change, it's sufficient to have a cohesive network. So people like us, people who have a common understanding. So for the change that you are introducing as part of your MSc in Health Services Management, if that's a small-scale change relative to your team within that defined boundary, it's sufficient to have this network of people, you know, that trust one another, they're peers, they're people like us. They could be, you know, all your nurses on the ward, they could be the members of your multidisciplinary team, they could be all your colleagues in the lab, wherever it is, if it's a small-scale change. Now, it's a little bit different if your initiative is around larger-scale change, or a change that scales boundaries, that crosses boundaries. Because in that situation, you need to bridge networks. So it's not what you had in common before. It's not what you have that's similar amongst you. that's going to bind you, or it's going to be the energy to drive the improvement. It's what you're all aiming for. So again, it comes back to this concept of having a common purpose, or agreeing on your common aim. Having a common purpose and getting commitment from people to work together, to take action, and to mobilise all their available resources to achieve that goal. Okay, so you see the difference. So it's for a small scale change. So if I was going to introduce change, I was a physio for the first 10 years of my career. If I was going to introduce a small scale change within the physio department, I would use the fact that I had a good working relationship with my colleagues. They all knew me. I had a good working relationship with my boss, and I'd introduce the change within the physio department. Now, if I, for instance, for the last 10 years, part of my role was managing the Change Hub at HSE Land. Now, first of all, it was an online hub, so I didn't have the luxury of a team. And my job was to go out and bridge networks. My job was to go out and listen to what people needed, and then to develop an online repository of resources that met that need. It was to build a community of practice of 12,000 people and to make them feel that they were part of something. So me going back and I mean, I can use my experience of being a physio, but it's a different scale of change. And it's really about bridging networks and trying to persuade people on that common goal. Because again, everybody in this room, everybody has a goal of safer, better healthcare. Anybody who doesn't have a goal of safer, better healthcare, put up their hand. No. Everybody has a goal of safer, better healthcare. And from the initiative that you're doing as part of your MSc, you are making a contribution towards that safer, better healthcare jigsaw. There may not be one solution, but if we join all the pieces of the jigsaw together, then we can deliver safer, better healthcare. Okay. Be aware of monologue culture. So don't confuse communication and engagement with information sharing. Information sharing, it's a legitimate part of change management, but it's a one-way traffic. So if you're sharing information, if you're telling people about your initiative all the time, and you're not actually listening, you're not actually taking their feedback on board, you're not incorporating their suggestions and flexing your design to take on board their contributions, well, to me, you're not going to get a better outcome. Because again, remember, we're designing for humans, we're adopting the principles of human-centered design. So doesn't it make sense to incorporate the voices of the people who are going to use those services or deliver them? Okay. On the subject of communication, just a few wee thoughts to share with you around the language that we use. And I was fortunate enough to participate in, again, the Horizon teams in the NHS have an online school for change agents, usually every March. And it's a fantastic opportunity to tic-tac with people who have an interest in change from all over the world. But in this March session last gone by, I was introduced to this fantastic concept, or to me it was fantastic because it was like something I knew and then somebody put a name on it and explained it to me, and the concept was reactance. So what is reactance? Reactance is an unpleasant motivational arousal that emerges when people experience a threat to or a loss of their free behaviours. It serves as a motivator to restore one's freedom. Okay? Now, the thing is, with reactance, it's not a passive thing. It is a motivational arousal. And it's important to understand about reactance because that should have a moderating influence on the language that we use. So, persuasive messages. So this is you trying to persuade your colleagues, trying to persuade maybe the management team, the finance committee, the clinical committee, the ethics committee, trying to persuade people to get on board and support your project. Persuasive messages arouse reactance, especially by using forceful and controlling language, such as should, ought, must, and need. We need to do this, we must do that. it's perceived as being more threatening and as eliciting more reactance than non-controlling language. So instead of using "we must do this" and "we should do that," using more moderated language such as "would you consider this?" "Can we do this?" "Would it be possible to?" "Could we?" "May we?" What would make it easier for you to get on board? People who have been given a forceful message such as "you have to do it" compared to a non-forceful message such as "consider it" experience more threat, which elicited more reactance, such as negative cognition and anger, and consequently people were less convinced. Okay, so remember when we talked about leadership, it was about building that common purpose and bringing people into the centre so that you're creating momentum, creating progress. If you use language that polarizes people, then you're actually shoving people away towards the poles. So just the concept of that concept of reactance. And it's actually based on evidence that they did in the States in public toilets, not public toilets, in lavatories on college campuses, where they put up a notice in the gents or the ladies: "Do not write on these walls under any circumstances." And then in the test site, they put up a notice that says, "Please do not write on the walls." So which lavatory had the most scrawl and graffiti on it? The first one, "under any circumstances." Okay, and the thing is, it's not somebody reads that and says "under any circumstances." So it actually arouses people to react in a negative way. So you're creating. Over the years, people have always come to me and said, "Patricia, what's the solution? How do I get over people who are resistant?" And the thing is, people who are resistant, sometimes they're resistant because they've experienced reactance. And when people talk about others who are resistant, that's exactly what they're doing. They're putting the responsibility for that resistance onto the other, whereas instead of taking the moment and being mindful and being aware and saying, "Is there something that I'm doing that is causing resistance in that person? Is there something in my language? Is there something how I'm behaving? Is there something how I'm delivering this message that is actually polarizing this person and pushing them away from me?" So, understanding resistance. I'm going to share this work by Mark Jabin with you. So, Mark gives us two scenarios: what not to do, but what we actually do, and then what we should be doing. So in scenario number 1, what not to do is we have an issue. Okay, so we have an idea for an improvement. We have a desired outcome. We generate options, and then we go to our stakeholders, our people, and we say, "These are the choices." And that's where the intervention is. And of course, some people will like some choices and other people will not like those choices. They prefer some other choices, some other options. And that's where you get the resistance. So, Mark Jabin says that's not what not to do, but actually what we do. But what we should do is have an issue, have our desired outcome, intervene here to get our investors on board, and then we can look at all the options, but we come up with one shared outcome. Okay, so you generate your options together, and then together, even if you have to use a weighted system, together you come up with your shared outcome, together you generate the options, and then together you have the choices. So instead of buyers who buy in, we need investors. So you'll often hear about people managing change, and they're talking about getting buy-in from their stakeholders. If you're looking for buy-in from your stakeholders, it's actually too late. What you should be looking for is investors to co-design with, so that you're generating the options together and you're committing to work together to pursue one option.
Sorry, one moment.
We're going to have a look at understanding culture. So I'm going to share with you some thoughts from Edgar Schein. The thing about culture, you hear people talk about change in the culture and cultural change. It's a big concept to take on, and sometimes when people talk about the culture, you might find it more helpful to break it down and think about climate. So it's a little bit like the weather. You could talk about the weather in Ireland, but what's the climate today in in Sandyford. Okay, so think about the climate, the work climate in your team. Is it conducive to change or not? But back to Edgar, culture sets predictability and normality, and hence change in it evokes anxiety and resistance. So it's a little bit that we spoke about earlier, your first day at work, when you had to actually negotiate your way to where your new job was. You had to find out what bus or train would get you there. If you were taking the car, was there car parking available? How do you get from the car park up to the door? What floor is your work location on? All of that. But the thing is, over time, we internalise all of that. We don't actually see it. And similarly, with other aspects, both tangible and intangible of culture, we absorb them, be they good or be they bad, and we negotiate our way around them. And we find a way to do our job, because humans are very good at self-organising no matter what environment they find themselves in, to be as effective as they can be. So, but that's the thing about culture. So sometimes when people hear about cultural change and people are talking about changing the culture, that actually makes them feel a bit nervous and scared, because of this characteristic of culture that it actually makes our lives predictable. It makes them normal. So when it comes to changing culture then, the advice would be, don't actually focus on culture change. Focus on what service outcome you want to deliver. So what's the problem? What's not working at the moment? Now, if something isn't working, quite often there's a cultural component to it. We're not making our theatre time slots. And why is that? Well, it can be of one individual's behaviour, or it could be of a group behaviour. So it's causing a problem, and usually if there's a problem, there's a cultural component to it. And that cultural component is linked to people's habits and routines. But what's the problem? If we approach culture as an outcome rather than a starting point, it is in this approach, we approach culture as an outcome. So if we fix the problem, then that means that we've addressed the cultural component of the problem. And if we can get that sorted, then culture becomes an outcome rather than the starting point. And that outcome is a collective set of behaviours. So when you break culture down to that collective set of behaviours, leaders can influence behaviour. Okay, so you can change culture, and it follows leaders can shape the culture where you work. Does that make sense? Okay, so on the concept of culture and influence, we're going to have a look now at a very brief video clip by Professor Richard Taylor, who works out of the University of Chicago. A couple of years ago, he won the Nobel Prize for Economics on his behavioural economics, his nudge theory. So we're going to have a little look at that now.
Richard Taylor, Professor of Economics and Behavioral Science at the Graduate School of Business at the University of Chicago, and co-author of the new book, Nudge, with Cass Sunstein, a professor at the University of Chicago Law School. Nudge is any small feature in the environment that attracts our attention and influences the behavior that we make. Nudging is done by what we call a choice architect, which is a fancy term for anyone who influences the choices that you make. Take the example of the cafeteria downstairs. Somebody had to decide where to put the salad bar, where to put the burgers, where to put the ice cream, where to put the coffee. That person is a choice architect because the arrangement of the food influences the choices that we make. So, for example, in our cafeteria, you have to go by the salad bar to get to the burgers. That increases the chance that you're going to go for the salad, which is a good thing. So another domain in which we see nudges is in safety. There's a beautiful road here in Chicago called Lakeshore Drive, and there's a dangerous S-curve right downtown where people are constantly wiping out. So what the city's done is painted lines on the road, and as you drive up to the most dangerous part of the curve, the lines are closer together, which gives you the illusion that you're speeding up, so you tap the brake and slow down, which is exactly what you want to do. You've been nudged. Yeah, some people worry that the idea of choice architects and nudging is somehow leading to Big Brother. And that's not the way we think about it. One of the points we stress in the book is that there has to be some choice architecture. So the person who designs that cafeteria downstairs has to put the food somewhere. The salad has to be in front of the burgers or behind the burgers. Given that you have to arrange the food in some order, we argue, why not have the choice architect arrange the food in such a way that people will be happier and healthier and maybe live a little longer.
Okay, just where the slides are coming up again. Did that resonate with you at all?
People who bring this about know that our religion and people accept it.
Of course they will. And you know why they will? Because we are human beings. Very, very, very high developed, intelligent creations. So of course they will. That's number one. But we're giving people the choice. And I suppose I'm not so much concerned with how people interact with that choice. The reason I showed you that clip today was, how can you be a choice architect? So rather than going to, your colleagues and saying, there's been a new piece of legislation, or this is a new policy, or this is in the corporate plan, or this is in our service plan, and we have to do it. How could you present that in such a way where you're influencing the choices that people make? Again, a lot of the reason why I engage with the college in delivering these lectures is I get such a buzz when I see people drawing that light bulb moment when it goes off. Yes, I can make a difference. Yes, I can. If I can't influence other people's behaviours, the one person's behaviour that I can influence is my own. So that whole power to realise that you have a choice. You have a choice to say, I am going to actively participate in service improvement. I am going to actively participate in safer, better healthcare. I have a choice. I have a choice in how I respond to people's behaviour at work. When I hear people criticising colleagues at coffee break, do I say, yeah, you're right, and what's more? Or do I hold my contribution? Be conscious of the control that you have. Be conscious of your own personal power to be a contributor towards improvement or not. Okay? That's being choice architect. Now, this is the Health Services Change Framework. You would have seen it previously at our last session. And a lot of what I've spoken to you about this morning relates to the largest, I suppose, lower section of the change framework, which is the People and Cultural Change Platform. So these are all the activities that we need to be attending to continuously and together in order to influence the outcome of our change efforts. So everything from being practicing distributed leadership, engaging with our teams, having conversations, influencing our culture, leveraging technology, engaging with our service users. These are, if these elements are well attended to, they are enablers of service improvement. If they're not, then it can be difficult to introduce service improvement to a team who haven't had this investment, because they're not ready, they don't feel enabled, there may be conflict, they may feel that they have training needs that aren't being addressed. So this is almost like being a gardener. If any gardeners in the room, and I'm not talking about Powers Court townhouse, I'm talking about a square of garden outside of your front lawn or your back. Any gardeners? Yeah. So when you finish your Masters in Service Management, then the next step is engaging with your garden. But it's the same concept. If you invest in your garden, if you nourish the soil, if you weed it, if you tend your plants, then you'll have a bountiful crop that blooms. If not, then your garden will be full up of weeds or rubbish, or and it's not a place where growth can happen or flourishing. So it's that concept of investing, and you have to invest in your people and cultural platform in order to get success in your change efforts. And so that's the first big element of the change framework. And then you'll see, and we thought a lot about how we would represent this in an image, and it does build on our previous change model, which was improving our services. But over the years, we as practitioners and the people that we worked with, we found that people were very willing to engage with the activities of change, which I'm going to talk about next, but maybe not paying enough attention to their ability to shape the environment they were introducing change into in order to get a better outcome. So that's why in this edition of our change framework, people's needs defining change, A, people's needs defining change is right up there in centre, and B, we're paying attention to all those other elements that need to be attended to in order to make change efforts successful. So understanding the activities of change, then, in this edition of the change framework, we have 3 broad categories. They're the define, design and deliver. So define, we covered a little bit earlier when we were talking about your process, so that when you know yourself, you know your people, and you understand your environment, both external and internal, then you decide which process. And the first step in that process will be identifying your shared purpose, so agreeing the outcome you want to achieve, understanding your current services. So you can see that a lot of these mirror the suggestions that people had around where to start, but starting in a mindful way and having an intelligent understanding of your environment makes the difference. Okay, so agree better outcomes, measure for success, and make your case for change. Design then is about agreeing to co-design, and we spoke a little bit about this earlier, this move towards partnering, co-design, active citizenship. So we're talking about 2018, and when we were designing up the framework, we really made it fit for purpose for 2018 up to 2028. So that's the lifespan of it. So what will the health and social care services in Ireland look like in 2028? And I'm hoping, or we're planning, and we're trying to facilitate more of this concept of co-design, active citizenship, partnership. Okay? Design your service operational model, test and refine it, agree your action plan to get you to where you are now, to where you need to be, and then the importance of communicating that action plan so everybody knows what's happening, when, and who's doing what. Moving into delivering then, so delivering is about implementation, and remember what the literature told us about focusing on that implementation and generating energy around that. Okay? You're going to support implementation, measure progress, celebrate success and sustain improvement. So I'm going to go into these in a little bit more detail now. Specifically around one thing I do want to touch upon is measurement. Now, I understand that you probably have a separate session on measurement, but the model for measurement that we've used in the change framework is that which our colleagues in the Quality Improvement Division of the HSC developed. And in this iteration of the change framework, we worked very hard to cooperate and to learn from our colleagues in-house and externally, but especially in-house, so that when people are picking up the change framework, they can see, yes, these people are giving us an integrated solution. So on the subject of measurement then, it's important to have a performance measure for your outcome and also for your process. Your performance measure, it needs to be aligned to the desired outcome for the service. Okay, so when you're picking your performance measure, it needs to be aligned to the desired outcome of the service. That might seem quite intuitive, but sometimes we measure elements because the measures are already available. But are they really aligned? Are they really linked to what we say we want to improve? Because otherwise, they'll not influence the behaviour in the desired way. Okay. Identify measures and the most appropriate data source to ensure a baseline can be created of the current situation. That's the point we were saying. You need to know where you're starting from, and the impact, and then you'll know what impact your change activities are having and whether you're actually progressing to the outcome that you said you wanted to achieve. Measure only what matters. So that's again, it sounds like such a simple, intuitive thing. Measure only what matters. Measure what's delivering value. So not all activity is actually delivering value. So measure what matters, and use existing measures where possible. So don't make a rod to beat yourself with. Find out what activity you're already measuring in your workplace and see, can you use that data? We measure a lot in Ireland, but what tends to happen is that it is all forwarded upwards and feeds into national data sets. I think there's some room for improvement, it's fair to say, in capturing that data at local level and seeing how, what's a minimum data set that we could use locally that would tell us that the initiatives that we're taking are actually delivering value, they have an impact, and we're improving outcomes, no matter what those outcomes might be. Quality outcomes, access outcomes, patient experience outcomes. Measures, they need to be relevant. Okay? They need to be accurate and reliable, comparable and coherent, accessible, clear and timely. Okay, so that's some of the characteristics of what makes a good measure. So when you're designing up your measurement plan then, some things you need to consider, choose your data collection method. And again, is the data available to you locally? How easy, how accessible is the data? Be clear on the client group or aspect of the service that is being measured, and again that speaks to relevance. Determine how frequent you want to collect the data and the duration of data collection. So specifically for your initiative here as part of your Masters, how long will you be collecting those metrics for, and how frequent? If it's in reality, hopefully next summer you'll all have your beautifully, your dissertations all written up and your service improvement documented. So giving yourself a timeline of 7 or 8 months, how frequently then, what are the milestones, when do you need to be collecting data during that period, or probably something less than 7 or 8 months. Consider what analytical tools will be used, then plan how your measurement will be reported. Okay, so how are you going to gather that data and present it in such a way that it makes sense to the people who are interpreting your service improvement initiative and the result and the impact of it, and then ensuring that your measurement plan is ethical. Does that make sense? So from designing your measurement plan, gathering your data, acting on your findings and reviewing, and then interpreting and presenting that information in a way that makes sense. Okay? So, it goes without saying, in this day and age, we have to be able to demonstrate our practices adding value. So, I'm sure the college will be insisting on this, but for each of you, you need to have an outcome measure and meaningful measures, and then your process measures that tell you that the actions you're taking are actually effective in bringing that about. Okay? Now, understanding service design. These points around service design, So, do you remember the 3 stages were define, design and deliver? Some points around service design, and these are pointers that I got from a website that designs mobile phones. So nothing whatsoever got to do with health. But the principles of good service design are universal across all services. So what do you need to consider when you're designing up a service? Hands up, anybody in this room who has part of their improvement initiative is redesigning a service or introducing a new service. Okay, maybe 10 of you. Okay, so these are some of the characteristics that you need to be mindful of. Your service design, it should be based on a comprehensive understanding of the purpose of the service. So what is your service designed for? The demand for that service, and then your organisation's ability to meet that demand. Okay? Clear enough? It's based on customer needs, rather than the internal needs of the service provider. Now, this can be a challenge for us in health and social care, because sometimes we design services that maybe the balance between the customer needs and the needs of the professionals that work within the service or the service providers, maybe that's a relationship that's out of balance a little bit. Okay, so the characteristic of good service design, it has to be based on the customer's needs. So our customers in health and social care are our patients, our service users, their families, our communities, the citizens of Ireland. Okay? They're designed to deliver a unified and efficient system rather than component by component. So you see where this fits in with we need to understand the nature of the system we're operating in. Because it's insufficient. If you are going to intervene in a system, it cannot be episodic. You can't just fix one element of it, because remember, it's moving all the time. So you have to address what's upstream, what's downstream, who's referring into your service. You have to address all of those things, and all those players, all those people have to be involved in the design. They have to be investors, so that at the end of the day, whatever outcome you achieve is resilient to the pressure that the system will put on it. Okay? It has to create value for service users and be as efficient as possible. So it has to create value. Now, we go back to our people. Anybody in this room old enough to remember a program that used to be on the telly years ago called Sesame Street? Okay. And did anybody remember the song in Sesame Street, Who Are the People in Your Neighbourhood? Okay, so that goes back to what I was saying. Who are your people? Question number 1. What is important for them? What matters to them? So then when we talk about designing up a service or redesigning a service, and we're saying one of the core planks that we're going to build this service on is that it's delivering value for the users of the service. But how do we know that if we don't actually know what is important to the people we're designing the service for? Okay? So doing your homework at the beginning, really getting to know your people and what's important to them, feeds into this concept of delivering value. Because otherwise you might perceive that you're delivering great value, but the thing about value, it's a little bit like beauty. Value is in the eye of the beholder. So you don't decide whether you're delivering value for your service user. The service user decides whether the service you're delivering is actually delivering value for them. And it's not just monetary value, it's value in terms of access, in terms of the use of their time, in terms of their outcome, in terms of their perception that their life has changed for the better. Okay, so because of that then, it has to be designed with input from users of the service. That makes sense, but sometimes it's a step that can be overlooked in our eagerness and in our I suppose the urgency or the pressures that our external environment sometimes put on us to design up service. It needs to be designed with input from the service users. Now, my colleagues in the Quality Improvement Division have developed some very useful resources on how to engage with service users, And that, if you go to the resources section on the Change Hub, in the categories panel on the left-hand side, one of the categories is how to engage with service users, or service user engagement resources. So sometimes when we're redesigning a service, sometimes people say, well, where do I start? You know, how do I identify my service user? So, as I say, the Quality Improvement Division have developed up some really useful resources in that regard. And having said that then, sometimes through your network or networks, you can identify a service user that might want to be involved, might have their hand up, might be actually waving and not drowning and saying, please, I'm available, I've got time in my hands, you know, the service is really important to me, I'd like to get involved. Okay, a challenge should be prototyped before developed in full. So again, one of the, if we go back to the characteristics of a complex system, the approach that is advocated for that is that you would probe the system, you'd sense what was going on, and then you'd respond. And again, in complex systems, people talk about safe experiments. Now, in health, we've been on a journey, and we've had adverse incidents over the years, and we have clinical care programs, now we have pathways of care. We have submitted a lot of our assessments into forms and paperwork and documents and putting those online. But one of the essential characteristics of improvement in a complex system is this ability to experiment and to fail safe. So that's the challenge for our leaders and leaders of teams. How can you create the space to fail safe? So that people, if you don't try anything, you're not going to fail at anything. But it's creating an environment where you're allowing your teams maybe to try something out. It may not have the result that you expect, but it's to make space for that fail safe. And that's one of the suggested ways to improve and to grow and to continually improve in a complex environment. So this concept of prototyping. It's designed in conjunction with a clear business case. So one of the elements in our people and cultural change platform is the concept of accountability. And we learned from the last iteration of our change framework, and we really promoted the concept of accountability in the current version. Delivering safer, better healthcare, better outcomes for our staff pride and public value. In Ireland, the public health sector is funded through the taxpayer, through tax returns. So, the onus is on us to demonstrate that we're delivering value for the tax euro of the citizens of Ireland. So part of that process of being accountable is employing good governance, and having a clear business case is an essential step with that. It can be a bit of a discipline in that, and sometimes I sit in front of clinicians especially and they say, we don't have time to do business cases. Why do you need the business case? You develop a business case as to enable somebody else to make a decision. You develop it for your own accountability, for your own governance. But if you are looking for sponsorship, if you are looking for funding, if you are looking for resources, if you are looking for investment, you're asking somebody to make a decision, make a call on that. It may be your management team, it may be a leadership team, it may be the finance committee. Or if you are looking outside of the health service, or you're looking for voluntary funding, if you're looking for development funding, you should have a business case, because you need to give people the information that they need to make that decision. Okay, so having your business case, it's a key step. It's designed and delivered in collaboration with all relevant stakeholders, both internal and external. So there's those kind of core elements of design and human-centered design. We're designing for humans. Does that make sense to people? Okay. Understanding implementation then. So you've defined what it is, you've agreed on your outcome, you've agreed to work together to achieve it, you've generated your options, you've decided together on the option that you want to go with, you've had a look at where you're starting from, you've designed up an action plan to bring you from where you're starting from to where you want to go, and then it comes to implementation. So what happens during implementation? you need to implement those actions that you've documented. Okay, so almost like your work breakdown structure, these are the elements, these are the actions that you need to take to move things from the way they are now to the way they need to be. Supporting all involved with implementation, and not forgetting that there's two things you need support with. You need support with your technical solution, so that might be a new process, it might be a new protocol, it might be a new continuous professional development program, it might be a new quality procedure. That's your technical solution. That's what you're producing. But then you also need support to support people to adopt this. So this is the other part of the equation. This is the importance of adopting. And remember, we talked about, as human beings, we become very efficient by developing habits and routines. And that adoption is about asking people to break a well-established habit or routine and to take on a new habit or routine. So those two elements, it's your technical solution, and it's also supporting people to adopt new behaviours or new ways of doing things. Measure progress in line with agreed outcomes, so that goes back to your measurement plan. So how do you know you're on track? And then when you get to implementation and you have your result, how will you know that has actually created value? How will you know that has had an impact? Because you're going back to your data, to your measures, and you're doing before and after, and you want to measurably say you've met a standard or you didn't meet a standard, and this is why you didn't. Okay, celebrate success. Remember we said that health and social care now, complex adaptive system, change is not episodic, it's about improvement, it's about every day. And that takes energy. So you need to support the staff who are engaging with you on that journey and celebrate success. There's nothing worse than asking people to come and give their energy, and then they get you over the line and they don't, there's no ceremony or there's no acknowledgement of that before they're into the next initiative. So do take time. Again, come back to the realisation we're all humans, we all like to be acknowledged, we all like to be seen and have our efforts seen. So acknowledge and celebrate that success, and then sustain improvements and share the learning. And again, I look at the health services, lots of good things going on, but I think the Change Hub has been a solution to sharing the learning, because we can make improvements, and we can be quite local in our improvements, even to the extent of making an improvement on one ward, and if I went up 2 floors in the same organisation, they'd have little or no awareness of what's been going on 2 floors down from them. But localised within one location, between hospitals, between hospital groups, between community healthcare organisations. So it's important to share the learning, and that's, how do you do that? There's different ways, but the Change Hub, which is a repository of learning, the case study repository, there's over 500 examples of where people have improved services on the case study repository at the moment. And it's funny, there's the 4 top reasons why people come to the Change Hub every year. Number 1 is they'll come and look at a resource. Number 2 is they're coming in looking for a case study. And number 3 is they're involved in a collaborative working group. So it's always in the top 3. They're looking for a case study, looking for how somebody else has done something similar before. Okay, so think about sharing your learning and think about the contribution that you can make. Again, coming back to the theme of your own personal power, the choices that you can make, your ability to be a choice architect. One of the decisions you might make is, I'm going to share my learning, even though it kind of exposes me and brings me out into the public a little bit. I'm going to share my learning either through something like the Change Hub or in some other medium where you're contributing then to organisational knowledge and continuous improvement. So implementation is part of the delivery, and the other part is sustainability, and I've mentioned it, but just to share that quote from the NHS sustainability model, which is on the Change Hub, but it speaks about holding the gains and evolving as required, and definitely not going back. And again, if you have a realisation that we're operating in a complex adaptive system, that really kind of puts it up to you that part of managing your change is making sure that it is sustainable, that it is resilient, and it will last the distance for you and last the distance that it was designed to last. Just to share that effectiveness share this effectiveness equation with you, bring you back to maths in secondary school. Effectiveness is equal to quality multiplied by acceptance. And that's what I was talking about. So the quality is your technical solution. It's the right answer. So whatever you design up in relation to your service improvement initiative for your MSc, technically that is the right answer, let's hope. But it's only one half of the equation, because the other half is acceptance. So you need to pay attention, and I use the term buy-in there, but you're looking for buy-in, you're looking for support, and you need to address the culture and people elements. And of course there is the relationship, because if, like a good gardener, you've been investing in your garden all along, and you've been addressing all the elements of the people and cultural change platform, well then, first of all, it makes an easier environment to introduce change into, but it also makes a change in that environment is more sustainable, and you'll find that people who operate in an environment like that are more open to embrace the next iteration of change. Okay, so just we mentioned that I talked earlier about the Change Hub, and I know I met you earlier in the year and we went through the new HSC Change Framework and where to find all the different resources and tools on the Change Hub. It has over 12,000 members now in September. The Change Framework is on the Welcome page. So if you make it as far as HSC land, and you can navigate to the Change Hub in the Hub section, once you land on this Welcome page, all the components of the Change Framework are interactive. So it's like a map on Google Maps. You just have to click on one of those elements in the Change Framework, and it will bring you to where you need to know to find out more about those activities, and it'll direct you then to the relevant tool or template. And the Change Hub then, it has an information and update section. It has resources not just around change, because again, the ethos around it was that it would be like a one-stop shop for people interested in change and improvement. So it has project management resources, it has quality improvement resources, it has risk management resources, it has understanding complex systems resources, it has how to engage with service users resources. So the idea is it's almost like a supermarket, and if you can make it there, you should find everything you need in on the different shelves or in the different sections. Now, and this is just a screen grab from the resources page, just to remind you again that the Health Services Change Guide, People's Needs Defining Change, can be found in the resources section. And then this is the literature review that underpins and informs and is the evidence for why we took the approach that we did. I suppose it was part of the literature review was part of our evidence base, but we, as organisational development practitioners, were very keen to go back to the users of the original guide and ask them, look, what worked for you? What could be improved? Where were the gaps? What do we need to bring greater emphasis to? So everything that you find in the current version of the People's Needs Defining Change is an amalgam of what the evidence is telling us, what subject matter experts both in-house and externally has told us, but also very much building on the lived experience of people who have used it. And we try to retain the good elements of it. People, your predecessors included, they really liked the focus on people in the change model, and they also liked the fact that it was adaptive and flexible and was a good fit for the environment that the majority of people working in health and social care find themselves in. So, you'd be delighted to hear that this is my last slide. I just have a couple of questions for you, and they're kind of reflective questions, but if you have a pen and paper in front of you, just jot down a few answers, and don't throw out this piece of paper, at least not until next July when you finish your Masters, okay? So, some questions for you. And the first question is, and it's not about life in general, it's around the journey that you're on now, your own personal journey of development, of leadership, of improving your competency, of improving your capability, and specifically around service improvement initiative that you're working on this year. Okay, so question number one is, what outcome do you seek? Now, you need to be brutally honest with yourself. This is not about the college. This isn't even around, your workplace. What outcome do you seek? Okay? The next question is, it doesn't have to be an essay now, just bullet points. What outcome, you should know this, this is, you know, intuitive. What role will you play in bringing that outcome about? So again, it's back to you using your personal power, you drawing your personal power to yourself, you stepping up into leadership. So what role will you play in bringing that outcome about? Okay. Question number 3. How will your behavior and decisions influence others in the choices they make? So how can you be a choice architect? What can you change about yourself that will influence others' behaviors and attitudes? And this is the choices that they make. Okay. The next question is, how will you persuade others to leave home on the change journey? And in thinking about that, how you persuade others to lead home on the change journey, think about this. How will you bring them from the known to the unknown? From the familiar to the unfamiliar? And from the comfortable to the uncomfortable? So, you know, that's your role as the change leader. Your role is helping people to let go of the safety harness of all those habits and routines they've built up during their working life. And to kind of shepherd them into a new way of doing things and making that environment safe for them. Okay, so how will you bring them from the known to the unknown, the familiar to the unfamiliar, and the comfortable to the uncomfortable? Now, as I say, there'll be lots of pieces of paper generated in the next year, but maybe at the end, you'll take those out and almost use them as your own terms of reference and ask yourself, you know, what measures would you give yourself around what you stated you were going to set out to achieve in the first place? And on that note, I'm just going to leave you with a quote from Marshall Gantz. Unless we begin to act, we cannot learn what we need to act effectively. We cannot learn what we need to know to act effectively. Okay, so don't be afraid of what you don't know, because actually sometimes not knowing stuff is an advantage in that you don't know stuff, you haven't developed biases and blind spots that maybe other people have developed. So not knowing isn't always a disadvantage. But unless we begin to act, not just talk, unless we begin to act, unless we begin to be models, not just preachers, we cannot learn what we need to know to act effectively. And that's the space, that's the wonderful, creative, reflective space that you find yourselves in at the moment. Because you are acting and you're finding out and discovering all the things you need to know to act effectively. And I wish you all, each and every one of you, the very best of luck on that journey. And thank you very much for listening to me today.